Warcraft 3, one of my favorite games, a game from the early 2000s. I want to talk about Warcraft 3 for a bit, because it's one of those games that feels really simple when you look at it on the surface, but the more you think about it, the more you realize how different it is from what you'd expect if it came out today. And I'm not just talking about technically or graphically, because obviously it's an older game, but more in how it's structured and how it expects you to interact with it, especially compared to more modern games that tend to guide you a lot more directly. One of the first things that stands out is how little the game explains once you're actually in it. There's a little bit of tutorial, and even though there are tutorials in a campaign that can teach you some of the basics, a lot of the deeper understanding just comes from playing the game, experimenting, and sometimes just failing until stuff starts to make a lot more sense. And that kind of learning process feels very different now, because a lot of modern games try to smooth that out as much as possible, where systems are explained clearly, mechanics are introduced gradually, and you're rarely left completely on your own to figure stuff out. Whereas in Warcraft 3, there's a lot of space where the game just kind of lets you deal with things as they come, and that can feel a bit rough at first, but it also makes the moments where something clicks feel a bit more earned. And another thing that really defines the game is how focused everything is, because even though it has different factions, units, strategies, it never feels overwhelmed in terms of scale. You're not managing hundreds of things at once, you're not doing a ton of micromanagement, you're usually just working with a smaller number of units that each feel more important. This also changes how you think about decisions, because losing a unit can actually matter more instead of having all of these units. Positioning matters, timing matters, and you can't just rely on having more of everything to get through a situation. And that smaller scale also makes the game feel more deliberate, where you're paying attention to what's happening moment to moment instead of just managing things at a distance. And I think that ties into why the game still feels distinct, because it doesn't try to do everything. It just does a few things really well and sticks to them. And that kind of gives it a kind of clarity that can be hard to find in more modern games that are trying to appeal to a much wider range of players. And then there's the campaign, which is probably one of the biggest reasons people remember the game so clearly, and I love it, because it doesn't just feel like a series of missions stacked on top of each other, but actually a continuous story where each part builds on the last. Especially in the second part of the game with the expansion, the Frozen Throne, I thought they did that really well and had a really nice story that carried through the entire game. Also, the way it's presented is pretty straightforward. There aren't a ton of extra systems layered on top of it, so the focus stays on the characters and what's happening, and that makes it easier to stay engaged with it over time. And even outside of the campaign, the game had a big impact through custom maps, which is something that doesn't really get emphasized in the same way anymore, where a lot of players were creating entirely new experiences within the game itself, using the tools that Blizzard gave them. And that added kind of unpredictability to it, because you never really knew what you were going to find, and some of those custom maps ended up becoming their own genres, their own fun games, or their own campaigns later on. A lot of people used it as a creative outlet or a way to make their own headcanon and their own stories. What's interesting is that this wasn't something the game forced or heavily structured in, it just gave players the tools and let them experiment. That openness led to a lot of creativity without needing so much oversight. Comparing to that now, it feels like a lot of modern games either don't offer that level of freedom or they structure it in a way that's more controlled, which changes how people interact with it. And another thing that stands out is how the game handles progression, or really how it doesn't handle it in the way you might expect now. Because there aren't a bunch of persistent unlocks or systems that carry over and over and over and over. A lot of these missions, they start fresh, and a lot of the campaigns, you start with a new character, a new hero unit, whatever you want to call it, new items, new gear to collect. And what matters is how you play in that moment, not what you've accumulated over the entire game or over time. To an extent within the campaign, it kind of does matter, but from campaign to campaign, you can have a bit of a reset. And that gives it a different kind of balance where everyone is working within the same basic framework. And I think that feels really refreshing compared to systems in a ton of games where progress is tied to long-term grinding or unlocking advantages or things that you've done leading up to the part you're at currently, because it keeps the focus on the gameplay itself rather than grinding up and focusing on what you've built up outside of the moment. And at the same time, it also means the game relies more on your understanding and decision making, because there aren't as many external factors influencing the outcome. You just have to act in the moment and do what you can. And I think that's part of why it feels satisfying to play, because when something goes well, it feels like it came from your choices in that moment rather than something you prepared ahead of time. And overall, the game just has this very direct relationship between what you do and what happens, without a lot of extra layers in between, and that simplicity can make it easier to see how everything connects. And that doesn't mean it's always easy. There's still a lot to learn and a lot of depth if you want to really get into it, but the way that depth is presented feels more straightforward compared to games that spread it across multiple systems. So when you go back to Warcraft 3 now, it can feel a bit different, not because it's really missing things, but because it's focused in a way that a lot of newer games aren't, and that focus changes how the whole experience comes together. And it's one of those games where the more you think about it, the more you realize how much of its identity comes from what it doesn't include as much as what it does, and that part is what still makes it stand out after all this time. Now, this game has been out for over 20 years. They did a remastered version of it, which went pretty poorly, albeit. All they did was just throw a new model on everything. They didn't really change the cutscenes and the animations as much as they said they were going to. I recently played through the full game myself, especially leading up to this video, because I wanted to have a very deep understanding and really know what I was talking about. And I have to say that I had a really fun time playing it. I played through every single campaign. I pretty much discovered as many parts of the maps as I could, as many Easter eggs as I could. I played the prologue campaign at the start, which is a completely optional campaign, and I played the bonus campaign at the end of the game, which is also completely optional. And I have to say that they were all very fun, and they still had parts of the story that were very important, and they still fit into the overall story, despite not even being a necessary part of the game. The story itself is very well written. If you actually think about the story for a second, you can see how all these little things happening in the story all add up. They all add up to one thing or one set of things happening. Fights this enemy, and then they meet an ally with this enemy, and then they become really long allies to defeat the final enemy or whatever it may be. For example, Horde and the Alliance, the orcs and the humans are always fighting each other, but in the end of the first half of the game, they end up teaming up with the Night Elves to defeat Archimonde, the final boss of the Reign of Chaos. And then when the second expansion comes out, the Frozen Throne, you have all these forces, the Night Elves, the orcs, the humans, everyone, and they all start fighting against the undead, even including those like Illidan, who's a bit of an anti-hero in the series, where he's a protagonist and an antagonist at the same time, but by the end of the game he's joined forces with everyone else and he's trying to destroy Arthas. It's very interesting to me how well the story plays together, and they actually did a very good job at making sure everything is wrapped up very neatly and everything makes sense in the end. All the characters that have been introduced and involved all do something or have some big part to play in the plot. No one's really that forgotten, which is very nice for me. I just think overall, especially for a video game, it's very well written. There's a lot of good voice acting. There's a lot of very fun game design. I feel like they don't make it too difficult, but they don't make it too easy either. And to an extent, the things that you do earlier in the game can pay off a little bit, because let's say you're playing a human campaign and in one of the first levels you get a really good item. Well, that item can carry through you for the rest of the campaign and help you out for the rest of the campaign. And then once you start the Night Elf campaign or any other campaign in the game itself, you don't have that item anymore, but it's a reset. It's a new chance to explore new things, new items, get new things that'll help you out in later missions. I think the gameplay itself is also very fun. I don't think they made it too complicated. There's just enough micromanaging to where you're dealing with multiple units and multiple abilities at a time, but not too much micromanagement where there's 100 different things going on and you can't even keep up with your units and keep up with everything happening. I also like how they gave very special abilities to the hero units, like the stronger units in the game, such as Arthas, such as Illidan, such as Malfurion, such as Tyrande, such as Thrall, and so on. They gave them special abilities that helped them stand out from the other units in the game. For example, Arthas had this really good healing ability that really no one else in the game actually had. Or how Kael'thas had this rain of fire attack, and no one else really had an attack like that. Of course, there were similar attacks, like Jaina had the blizzard attack, There's probably a few other units that had fire-like attacks, but I liked how the hero units had their own unique, stronger versions of attacks, and it made them really stand out from the weaker units. And so instead of just having a ton of weak units, you had this one kind of strong hero unit, and then you had a bunch of weaker units supporting it. Overall, I think they had a nice twist on the real-time strategy type of game. I think they did a really good job at mixing story and gameplay in a way to where the story wasn't too much, but also the gameplay made sense at the same time with the story. I feel like really the world building wasn't as strong at times, but I feel like getting to look at a lot of Blizzard stuff, playing World of Warcraft and all this other stuff, I'm able to really understand the world that I'm in. And if you pay close enough attention, the world building is not all too bad. It's just a little tricky to grasp if you're new to the whole Warcraft universe, but it's not impossible. Overall, if you haven't tried this game, I'd definitely suggest giving it a try. It's very good. The cutscenes are entertaining. They have good story. They keep just the right amount of interest while also driving the plot forward. There's a lot of different ways, like I said earlier, that different parts of the plot all come together to form this big picture. And I just really recommend giving it a shot. It is one of Blizzard's greatest games, and it was from a time where Blizzard was really well known for releasing good games and doing a very good job on all of the things they attempted, which isn't really the case anymore. In fact, it's very different from how it used to be, but it was at a time where Blizzard was really going strong and at its peak, so I recommend giving it a shot if you haven't.